Now we get to the question of how you should deal with works that have been, let's say, liberated by other people. Many TDM researchers face the issue of whether they should take advantage of access to copyrighted works that have been initially copied illegally or have had their digital locks broken in violation of the applicable rules under the DMCA. There isn't any US case law directly on point here, and none of the precedents confirming the fair use status of reproduction for the purpose of text data mining research suggest that lawful access is a precondition to fair use. Consequently, we can only address this difficult question by reasoning from first principles. The overwhelming weight of authority rejects any notion that lawful access is an absolute, per se, precondition to fair use. And the more persuasive view is that the question of whether the work was subject to prior unlawful acts by third parties is irrelevant to the fair use analysis. Furthermore, although there is mixed authority on the question, it's doubtful that the defendant's own morality and propriety should influence the question of fair use. The fair use doctrine does not come down to questions of individual moral or artistic virtue. Instead, the fair use doctrine defines the outer boundary of copyright protection. Although it's not beyond argument, the far better view is that a user's good faith is irrelevant to the fair use analysis. Moreover, even if good faith is relevant in some circumstances, we believe that 1. It would be simplistic to equate good faith to access to a legally made copy, and 2. Even if good faith is relevant under some circumstances, it likely has no real significance in the face of an otherwise overwhelming fair use argument. Contrary to our assessment of the law in the United States, in the European Union, lawful access to the work is required. This position is probably held by other countries outside of the EU as well. But again, it's complicated. Article 3 of the Digital Single Market Directive is limited to, quote, reproductions and extractions of works or other subject matter to which they have had lawful access. Article 4 is likewise limited to reproductions and extractions of lawfully accessible works or other subject matter. There is some ambiguity about the scope of this requirement, but it seems likely that otherwise lawful text data mining would be rendered unlawful in Europe if the source material was copied illegally. At this point, we can only speculate as to how the lawful access requirement is meant to interact with the provision in Article 3 of the DSM that appears to preempt otherwise applicable anti-circumvention laws. It's also worth noting that several other jurisdictions have adopted similar lawful access requirements in their legislation that addresses text data mining or research exemptions more generally. Having examined the question carefully, we believe that the fact that a third party copied the work illegally or illegally circumvented a technological protection measure relating to the work should not alter the fair use analysis. What's more, we believe that even if a researcher unlawfully bypassed DRM herself, that should not affect the fair use analysis either. However, because there is no US authority directly on point, we can only express a moderate level of confidence about these conclusions. In terms of a hierarchy of risk, we think that the risk of merely obtaining works from a third party who broke DRM is low. Likewise, the risk of obtaining works from a third party who obtained them unlawfully is also low. In contrast, the risk of breaking DRM oneself or encouraging someone else to do it for you is relatively low in terms of how it might affect the fair use analysis, but obviously relatively high in terms of potential liability under the anti-circumvention provisions of the DMCA. In the European Union and other countries outside the US, the hierarchy of risks may be different. Researchers who benefit from Article 3 should be able to break DRM without liability, but it's unclear whether obtaining a work from a third party who had broken DRM would be regarded as violating the lawful access requirement. Researchers in Europe would also be prohibited from conducting text finding research using source material that has been copied illegally.